Express News Podcast presenta el siguiente programa.
Hi, hello, welcome to Migrants with Pedro Prado, Migrantes con Pedro Prado. Today we are joined by Lara Parizotto, Executive Director of Migrant Democracy Project. Lara has been leading voice on migrant rights and democratic participation in the UK. Actually, she co-founded the Our Vote campaign, and in 2022 was elected as a councillor in Brentford West. She is helping migrants understand their rights and take part in the democratic process. Lara, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Pedro. Yeah, always really excited to speak about democratic participation and how migrants can be part of the political process.
Lara, let me start with your personal history. Lara, where are you originally from?
I'm from Brazil, South Brazil, border with Paraguay and Argentina. And yes, I grew up there until I was 18 years old.
Oh my God. And what made you decide to migrate to the UK? Because you have been in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think with many of others of us, there's always a bit of a migration has a zigzag format. And for me, it was my grandma who first left Brazil to Italy to go get her Italian citizenship. And then when she got her Italian citizenship, she decided to come to the UK and explore opportunities here. And then me and my mom joined her for only a year when I was 13 years old. And then we all went back to Brazil. And then when I turned 18, I wanted to come back. So it wasn't my first time in the UK when I was 18. It was my first time coming on my own. But I had some familiarity, I had some knowledge because of that year that I actually stayed here with my mom and my grandmother.
Oh, wonderful. And maybe Parizotto is from Italy.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Latin Americans have a second nationality or are able to try to get that second nationality. And for my grandma, it was something that she always wanted to do when she was growing up in Brazil, that she wanted to go and see the place where her family was from and obtain that citizenship for herself so that she could live here as well. So it was, it's thankfully to her that I have had the Italian passport, the EU passport that has opened so many doors for me here in the UK.
And Lara, how was your experience when you first arrived? I know that it wasn't 2 times, but yeah, professionally, how was this experience?
Yeah, just briefly, like I think the first time when I was only 13 was really, really hard because I was a teenager. I didn't speak English. So it was hard. But then the second time, I think it was with a lot more excitement. I came at the age of 18. I also encountered a lot of difficulties, but it was difficulties with hope, with excitement. So I went back to school here in the UK. I couldn't go straight to university because I didn't have the correct qualifications. So I had to go back to do my A-levels in the UK. And I started doing my A-levels at the age of 18, where most people start their A-levels at the age of 16. But it was there that I started studying politics A-level, which was recommended to me by the teacher. And I didn't know anything about politics, but the school recommended that I study A-level politics. So I said, fine. But I didn't think it was going to be something that I was going to pay too much attention to. And then it ended up that I really, really loved it. I think it was because of the topic that I was studying, like in theory in the book, but also that as a migrant in the UK and being with my, especially like Brazilian, Latin American community, I was seeing how much of politics affects our reality here in the UK. And being able to study politics and see the real impacts of politics on renters. I was renting a home in London, or a room in London in a shared house, where the landlord was very dismissive about the repairs that were needed. I was working as a cleaner with other Latin Americans who were not that well paid. And I saw other migrants facing really tough challenges in the migration system. It was studying politics and seeing the reality of politics that I think made that difficulty exciting as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, at some point you were in politics. At some point you were with migrants in terms of that they have to live, or they, working there, doing things like migrants. But my question is, what challenge exactly did you face that shaped your political views? I mean, you said, "Oh my God, that is not in good way."
Yeah. I think it was a mix of personal experiences as well as political awakening by seeing what others were going through. So I think, to me, like, what really touched me was the fact that I worked as a cleaner for 3 years in an office. And most of us were Latin Americans. And I had the privilege of having this Italian citizenship that allowed me to work and allowed me to study and allowed me to just live in safety, not worrying about whether I could be in the UK or not. But at the same time, there were other people around me who didn't have that security of their status. And I remember at one point or another, I wanted to complain to the supervisor about how much we were being asked to work extra hours, but we were not being paid those extra hours. And I wanted to complain. I wanted to do something about it. And I remember being like, let's do something. And others were like, no, we can't complain because we don't have status in the UK. If we complain, we're so much at risk of deportation, detention. And I think that in itself, I was like, what's so different about us? Most of us are from the same country, from the same area of the world, but I get to have this privilege of a citizenship that opens all doors for me, and others don't. And I'm really grateful for my Italian citizenship, but if we're honest, I didn't do anything different than someone else. I was born in the same country, Brazil, as other Brazilians, but I get to enjoy the benefit of a citizenship that has been passed down to me. So I think that concept started to make me ask questions about what are borders? Why are they made this way? Why is it so easy for some and so difficult for others? And if it can look a different way, how can we build it to look better and just and fair for everyone? So those are questions that I've started asking myself at that time, when I was really seeing the impact of the decisions of others on my community and the day-to-day reality of them.
Lara, now from migrant to political voice.
Yeah.
And you were elected.
Yes.
As a councillor in Brentford,
Yes.
Brentford West. How did that moment feel for you? Because until now, you told us that you went as a migrant.
Yeah.
But at some point you said political voice is a need.
Yes.
How was that moment? How feel you?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to call it a moment because it was a long journey. I started studying politics at A levels, and then I studied politics at university as well. And I think that flame just started like growing and growing and growing. That passion, that heat, the anger. And when I was studying politics at university, I also started getting really involved with the Labour Party, the political party that I was a member of. And they started encouraging me to stand as a councillor. I would go canvassing with the political party, knocking on doors, speaking to residents. And again, I really enjoyed that idea of not just studying politics, not just talking about it in theory, but actually seeing the practice of it, like what what can help people right now, what is needed right now, not just big names of political thinkers, but policies that help now. So I started enjoying that process, speaking to residents, seeing more views on issues. And so I just continued getting engaged until the 2022 elections, when I was back in London after university. And I said, okay, I feel like now is the time. I'm out of uni. I will be living here for a while, and I want to do it. So I put myself up for a candidacy. I was interviewed by other members of the political party, and then I was officially named as a candidate. And then it was like 4 months of knocking on a lot of doors of residents in Brentford West, asking for their vote. And again, that was a super exciting opportunity because I got to knock on doors and sometimes speak to another Brazilian behind the door who was like, oh my God, I never knew that I could participate in politics. I never knew that a Brazilian could be standing in politics. And I remember that Brazilians from across the UK were messaging me like, oh, I saw you on the news, or I saw you on social media. So I think it's an important responsibility as well, because you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it with and for your community. So I really, the day that I got elected, I think was really, really emotional, really exhausting as well. I had like not slept for a few days. So yeah, it was really beautiful to see what we are able to do when we do it with community and start to increase the democratic participation of all of us.
Lara, do you think that your background as a migrant gives you a different perspective in politics?
Yeah, 100%. It's what I say to our leaders that we're now training to become candidates as well through Migrant Democracy Project, that our lived experience is so important in politics, because whether it's housing or healthcare, migrants have a little bit of a different experience of that public service in the UK than the average population. And that is also the case for someone who's disabled. You know, everyone who interacts with these public services will interact through their lived experience. And for migrants, it's often a case of, are these services, do they have translation provision for us so that we're able to actually access housing, healthcare, childcare in the UK? Are we prevented from accessing some public service or another because of our status in the UK? Do we need to show status? Do we need to show this document or another? And when we're bringing this discussion to the political table, I think we end up with a much more cohesive and efficient service, because it's being debated and discussed with people that have that experience. And that's what I mean, not just my own, but it's important that we actually have many different voices, many different experiences. And migration is one of them. But at the end of the day, I'm also a young person, I'm also a woman. So all of those things come together to make my experience of something which at the end of the day creates a public service that meets the general population.
Before to go to the Migrant Democracy Project, I would like to ask, did you enjoy the job, the work as a counselor?
Yes, I did. I really did enjoy the work of a counselor. I love speaking to residents. I love public engagement. I think that's the number one role of a politician, right? Like, you're going to be involved with people, and people will bring to you all sorts of questions, issues, challenges, and opportunities as well. So I like that you do have to be really present with the community. And I like that. I liked finding different alternatives to some issues. So, for example, in Hounslow, there was a high migrant population. The Home Office had commissioned a lot of the hotels for asylum seekers. And that was something that I was very aware of because I also work in the migration sector. So again, I really enjoyed being able to think about an issue that others may have not considered before, because it wasn't something that they were they were very aware of. And yeah, I feel very proud that now I can look back and know that I was part of important decisions, such as to approve the building of X amount of new homes that people are now living in. So that feels really empowering. But I also have to be honest, there were lots of challenges in being a councillor, being an elected person. There's also a lot of, privacy issues that you have to deal with when you're elected, like having your personal and public life. And politics itself can be very, very difficult. To be fully honest, I started having some disagreements with my political party, which I'm now no longer a member of. So that resulted in some challenges of my experience in politics as well.
So, Lara, now I would like to talk with you about the Migrant Democracy Project. For those hearing about it for the first time, what does the Migrant Democracy Project do?
Thank you. So Migrant Democracy Project is a not-for-profit organization in the UK which is hoping to build migrant political power. So we support migrants to register to vote. So a lot of migrant communities in the UK have that right to vote. If you're British, Irish, Commonwealth, many EU citizens have the right to vote, but often don't know. So we do that active engagement of voter registration, how to register, what is the UK political system like, when are elections happening, and encourage people to participate. And then we have our main campaign, Our Home, Our Vote, which is for everyone, no matter where they're from, to actually have the right to vote, which is something that we're very much campaigning for right now. And we are also supporting migrants who want to stand in elections. So we support people from migrant backgrounds who want to think of a career for themselves in politics, but really bringing that the lived experience and the migrant community angle to politics. So we offer training on community organizing, on political leadership, public speaking, things like that. And all of that, we believe that we're hoping to bring more political power for migrants.
You talk about democratic participation.
Yeah.
What does it mean in real terms for migrants? What does it mean for migrants?
Yeah, great question. I think often we think of democracy as just like the ballot box, just the election day. And that is definitely very important. There are over 4 million people in the UK who do not have the right to vote in elections. And for me, that's really, it's shocking. We can't call it a democracy when there are millions of people who live in a country and cannot vote. So that aspect of democratic participation is a must that needs to be addressed. And we're campaigning for that to change so that everyone who lives in the UK can vote. But also democratic participation goes beyond that. It is what we do on a day-to-day basis. It is the fact that if you don't like how your council is run, that you understand who your councillors are, what do they do, what do members of parliament do, how do they interact with one another, how are decisions that affect where we send our kids to school, the hospital that we use, the buses that we take, how are they made, and how can we get involved in these decisions? Because if we think the bus fare is too high, or we don't like how our council collects the bins, we don't just have to accept that. We can mobilize for change. And we have seen many examples of our communities getting together, getting organized, and winning things for them, whether it is, higher pay in a workplace or for a development that wasn't going to be beneficial for the community to be maintained. So I think Migrant Democracy Project enters that space through the we need votes for all, and we need to be voting so that we use the leverage of our vote for our rights, but also on a day-to-day basis, how do we understand the system around us and how do we interact with them?
We are talking in a special moment in London, in UK, because this moment is about local elections, 2026.
Yeah.
And what about candidates? Because you are doing I think, a good job with the people who want to represent the community.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see. We've been training, we've got a program called Empower, where we train first generation migrants to stand in elections. And now for the local elections in May, we have about seven leaders who are going to be standing in different boroughs of London from different migrant backgrounds. We've got people in Southwark, in Newham, in Haringey, in Islington, who have completed the program with us and are now ready to be great candidates. And we hope that we hope all of them were going to get elected in May to continue. A lot of them I already call amazing community leaders. They are already well known in their community. They're doing good work. They are essentially doing the job of a councillor, but they're not yet elected. So I'm really hoping to see them officializing that work that they do in their community by getting elected and bringing more community power to us.
Lara, before the organization that we are talking, there was the Our Home, Our Vote campaign.
Yes.
What impact did it have?
Yeah. So Our Home, Our Vote officially started as a campaign in 2020. There's signs of it originating in 2020 when the government announced the previous elections bill. So the elections bill in 2020 was the one that brought photo ID to the UK, which is now mandatory to use when going to vote. And me and my co-founder started campaigning around that bill for EU citizens to not lose their right to vote in local elections, because we were working in an organization called the 3 Million, which supports EU citizens in the UK. So we started working around that bill, but we didn't want to just campaign for EU citizens to maintain their vote. We wanted to campaign for everyone to have the right to vote. So that campaign, we worked a lot during the 2021 bill, and we even have, for example, I have a video of Keir Starmer, now Prime Minister, saying that he supports the extension of the right to vote, because I asked him that question directly in 2021. And we also had an amendment tabled to that bill by a Labour MP for the right to vote to be extended to everyone. The campaign had a lot of initial excitement and wins, and that started to become the organization. So Our Home, Our Vote is still a campaign within Migrant Democracy Project for Votes for All.
Okay, I would like to move to Latin Americans.
Mm-hmm.
For Latin Americans living here in the UK, in London, why it is important to engage in local politics?
Yeah, 100%. For many Latin Americans, we either have no second nationality, so many of us don't have the right to vote, sadly, but many of us do have a dual Spanish, Portuguese, Italian nationality that allows us to vote in these local elections, but doesn't allow us to vote in the general election. So it is really important for us to participate because, if we have that vote, we have to exercise it, because often we're not just voting for ourselves, we're voting for our wider community that may not have the right to vote. It's important because we have so many Latin American candidates standing in these elections. But of course, we have to vote for what is in our community interest. So there are candidates that are standing for more migration justice in the UK, for migrants to have rights. So it's really important that we pay attention to that. And it's important because, again, our communities are constantly being attacked, whether it's by media or by politicians. We see a lot of anti-migrant rhetoric, a lot of anti-migrant sentiment, a lot of actual policies that are also being proposed by some of the political parties for these local elections. So we have to be very wary, be very conscious about who is proposing to represent us, because we have to think about our collective future and vote for candidates that are going to meet our community's interest. And I know that you also speak to Clark about the campaign for census recognition, and our community doesn't yet have that category in the census. And again, many of our communities don't have the right to vote. So it's even more important that we're using every and any opportunity of political exercising democratic rights to say, we are here, we exist, we have a voice.
Lara, do you feel the Latino community is underrepresented?
I do believe the Latin American community is underrepresented, and generally, unfortunately, a lot of other migrant backgrounds as well. We did a study of London councillors, and we found that only 1% of councillors in London are of another nationality, compared to London being such a hugely migrant population. And I think when it comes to Latin Americans, at the moment, we can really count in max 2 hands who our Latin American candidates are. I think after these local elections, that will start to change. But we think about it, Brazilians alone, from the numbers that are like over 250,000 Brazilians in the UK. And right now, it's really difficult to think of Brazilian politicians, whether at the local level or the national level. So again, we need to increase that representation of our communities. But again, I don't believe that it's just representation for the sake of representation. It's a representation that is backed by content, by policies that benefit us and our future.
If someone is listening right now, what is the first step that they can take?
Yes. So to participate in politics, or
to participate in politics, or to take part in this democracy and this talking, because sometimes we have rights, but
yes,
we don't know
what
we have to.
If people are interested in participating in politics, I think the first thing, especially now that we have the local elections happening, is understanding the political parties that exist around us and what are they saying? What are they saying about immigration? What are they saying about housing, about healthcare? Understand really what their proposals are on paper, so that on the 7th of May, if you have the right to vote and you're registered to vote, you vote with education and with knowledge about who should represent you. And if you want to do even more, you can volunteer for your political party. You can actually meet the candidates. You can go to hustings events. You can go canvassing with them to support them. If you really want a political party to win, then you can support them. You can actively go knocking on doors for them and volunteer for them. And if you want to campaign for everyone to have the right to vote, and if you're thinking maybe of a political future for yourself that you want to get elected, you can join Migrant Democracy Project. We've got lots of events, lots of opportunities and trainings coming in the future.
Lara, congratulations for all that you are doing for everybody, for Latin community.
Thank you.
And at the end, what are your projects or priorities for the next year? Or actually for the rest of this year, because you have a lot to do.
For the next of this year, we are doing a lot until June. So we have these elections happening where we're doing so much work, training our candidates, supporting the candidates that we've trained up to get elected, and encouraging people to participate in the local elections. After June, from the summer onwards, we're really going to be taking some time to learn, but we're soon going to get started with more training programs for those that might want to consider getting more involved in the parliamentary elections that are going to happen in 2029. So really, we're going to continue campaigning for votes for all. We're going to continue engaging with our members of parliament so that they amend the legislation, and we're going to start training more and more people who want to get elected.
Finally, the message, what you give to migrants who feel politics is not for them, what will be this message?
This is our home. While we call it home, we've made it home. We use the public services and we contribute to public services. We deserve to have our interests and our needs met by politics, by our representatives. We belong here, and it's our home, and it's our vote as well, and it counts, and we can participate, we can get involved.
Lara, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Pedro.